You are on the block party with me and award-winning creative director and designer Ernie Cefalu. I'm your host, Joyce Conroy. And Ernie, thank you so much. What a difficult week it's been. There's those performers that really resonate with you. And for me, Melanie did. I had a chance to see her in person, to meet her. And I know the music world is going to miss her. I miss her already, and so many of the fans. And it was wonderful of you to once again put those beautiful illustrations and especially the Madrigada
Oh
LP.
yeah, that was a real special album for her. I worked on three total, but that one was a real magical kind of album for her. And then, the Live at Carnegie Hall album, and those kind of things just I think, the only good thing about any of this is, well, there's a few good things, but one of the really good things I think is it brings more awareness to who she is and who she was and what
Yes.
she did. She was a real groundbreaker. I mean, she was at Woodstock. It's like Richie Havens, when we talked about Richie and how I used to see him on the campus there at UC Berkeley, and the next thing you know, he's at Woodstock. It was amazing, and Melanie was one of those kind of artists that was coming up in that same era, with Joan Baez. Well, Joan Baez was a little bit more before her, but Judy Collins and people like that were really breaking ground, not only for women, but even for the music that was being done. And I saw her as kind of like a link between, the hippies who had already replaced the beatniks and the whole movement of what was going on in the country, and just her voice and the things that she talked about, the things that she sang about, kind of person she was really special, very, very special. And I met her with the Gather Me album, and it's a funny story, Joyce, that there's so many connections, and we've talked about this before, of how one thing leads to another, and then there's a few dots missing, but we add them, and then it makes you see the whole picture. When I got involved with this Gather Me album, I was working a lot with Bill Levy. We had talked about him before. He was my mentor he was a senior creative director at Decca Records, and Neighborhood was being distributed by Decca Records. And Bill was in charge of this album. And as we were talking about it with other stuff I was doing, I was starting to make the transition between Norman Levitt, where I did the Jesus Christ Superstar, and Craig Braun, where I did the Stones Tongue that got me in the door, and then a bunch of other albums that we talked about. But the interesting thing was that because I had left Norman Levitt, and Bill and I were talking about this Melanie album, and I now was at Craig Braun, there was no love for Craig Braun or any of the people from there with Bill Levy. They had been pitching him for a long time. We had talked about this before, that their main source of revenue and income came from working with the record companies, working with executives, working with creative directors. And they hounded Bill for a long time. And he was very negative about me leaving Norman Levitt. And really, his advice to me was to stay right where I was, and everything would be okay. And he's got all this other stuff coming up and the Melanie album. And anyway, I went ahead and did it anyhow. We all make mistakes in life sometimes, but I went ahead and went to Craig's anyway. But right at that same time, um, Bill wanted me to work on this album for him with Melanie. So I kind of did, and there was a similar thing that happened as I joined Craig Braun and came back out to the West Coast with the Alice Cooper Schools Out album. The similarity there is I had left when I was working on both those pieces, and had left where I was and went to Craig Braun. Shep knew that I had created the Schools Out comp. He had saw it, and I showed it to him when Tony and I made the presentation. It had mysteriously disappeared, and Tom Wilkes nor Craig Braun could figure out how to make it do what I did, which was the legs to pop out, and it would stood up like a real school desk. And so Shep came to me and said, and we had already left Craig, and we had started Pacific Pioneer, and he asked if and this was probably the first week that we started. So it was in January of 1972, probably the first weekend, he reached out to us because comp had disappeared, and he said that that Craig or Tom Wilkes, who was his creative director now, couldn't figure out how to make it work. If I would work with him, we could do it on the down low. And because I didn't want to have a conflict with Craig, I didn't want to have a conflict with Craig and Bill Levy. So I was kind of stuck in the middle between these two, and
Yeah.
did like a down low kind of thing with Bill Levy on Melanie. And he and I worked together. Then there was a photographer that we hired to do the photographs, and there was a designer that worked with him that and you won't see my name on it anywhere.
You
And you
didn't. I looked because I was looking at the Gather Me LP online, went through a couple of sites and did not see it.
Yeah, my name isn't on that, and it isn't on the School's Out album either. And I did both of those, but I did them one because I left the company and I got no credit, and I left with his vice president. So, he hated me, and I had never gotten a Christmas card from him, which was kind of disappointing. But, so it was kind of interesting how these two albums, Gather Me and School's Out, my name isn't on any of them yet. I did them both, but it's okay because the next album for Alice Cooper uh, came to us, and the next album for Melanie came to us. So in my mind, it was a way, and Tony and I had talked about this. It was a way of reassuring the fact that we were the ones that they went to in the first place. And now they're
Yeah.
back giving us the next one. And Alice went on I did 13 albums for him. Melanie, unfortunately, only a few. But and one of the other things that was really great, and you had made this comment about how now her and Peter were back together, and I'm a sole believer in that we'll all be back together at some point, and be aware of each other, and the love and the everything else, the emotional piece of it all is there, and it's all come top of mind. And I met Peter in 1971 when I was at Craig Braun. They were in New York, he and Melanie, working on the Gather Me album. And I had a chance to meet Peter. Again, he understood that even though I'm working with Bill Levy, and the two of us are teaming, and Bill had built him up to me, and the Jesus Christ Superstar stuff that I had done, and some of these other things, the Rolling Stones time. So they were very receptive. Both he and Melanie, and we hit it off right away. I mean, Melanie and I did, but not like Peter and I. You had talked about this too. You met Peter. He's just a wonderful, wonderful person. The world has lost somebody really great when he passed. And he was a real visionary. And we had talked about that before with the $5 Shoes album, and how Neighborhood, he had the vision of the music changing and wanted to be ahead of it. That was Peter, and just a really fair person. And so working with him, the next album that they did, the Madrigada album, was a no-brainer for him. He came right to us, he and Melanie, and what you see behind me here is the photograph that we put together. We worked with the photographer and did some double exposures and insets, and then on the inside, and this was the back cover. And when it's funny because she had explained the meaning of Madrigada when we were working on this album as to being that kind of that magical time between sunset and sunrise, and what happens at night. And she said it really profoundly on the back cover. We actually said it in there, and what it was meant, but it was a Portuguese saying and a feeling. And so we put that on the back. That's the back cover you see here. And then I'm going to move out of the picture here for a minute because the inside spread was really dynamic. I really liked this movement. And it reminded me very much of, and because when she described what Madrigada meant, to me, the first thing I thought of was A Midsummer Night's Dream, Shakespeare's A Midsummer Night's Dream, and the movie that was made with Mickey Rooney and some of these other people back in I guess it was the 30s, because he was just a kid. And it was that magical part of it that really always, from the first time I saw that movie to even to today when I see it. Every once in a while they'll show it on Turner Movie Classics, and I see this image. It very much could be a still out of that film. And when we created it, that's what I had in mind to, and of course we have all the lyrics in there. It was a gatefold album. And I think out of all the albums inside, all the inside spreads that I've ever done for albums, I think this one works. It moves you emotionally when you listen
Yes.
to her music and you watch it. Like if you set the album up and you put on the music to the Madrugada album, it just it like if you had to put the music into an image, that image is really Madrugada. And her and Peter and I had talked about it. Tony, we became very good friends with her and Peter. And my partner Tony was the guy that was the sales guy. So, and they came to the studio a couple times when they were out in California. But it was just wonderful working with her and with Peter. And then the next album that we did was the Live at Carnegie Hall album. And that was an interesting cover because it really, we didn't have a whole lot of time, but we needed something really kind of folky, but yet kind of really a great, when you look at it, it evokes a great emotional connection. And the printing of this package was less than I would have hoped. We weren't able to go out on press when it was printed. And what you're missing here is in the Melanie logo that I created, Carl Ramsey, our airbrush illustrator, had put a tortoise shell texture in it. And it was just beautiful. I mean, it really, really looked great. And the border that you see actually on the inside, this is the inside, this brown border that you see going all around this photograph was all tortoiseshell. And when they printed it, it was not a board package. It was a paper wrapped to board. And so the quality of it wasn't really great. I wasn't able to be out there on the printing press. A lot of times, people think that, especially salespeople or people that are buying production in a company, think that printers are designers.
No,
And
they don't get it. They don't get it.
yeah, they don't get it. But it saves. Uh, in fact, when I was doing a lot of the album covers and Ivy Hill was printing them, they were in downtown LA, and they would always set my press checks up at the worst time during traffic or in the middle of the night. It was this when you have big printers like Ivy Hill, those presses run 24 hours a day. So they were able to arrange my press check at a time that would be very inconvenient for me to go there. Okay. And it happened again and again and again. But guess what? I showed up every time. It didn't matter. If it was a time that was going to be in the middle of the night, I'd go to sleep, wake up, and go out there. And so it became kind of like a running joke that we had because I knew all the press guys. I knew the guys that were there during the day and during rush hour. I knew the guys that were there in the middle of the night. And they had shifts. They had 3 or 4 shifts of printers that would come on. This way, the press was always running. Printing was an amazing art and a great vehicle and a tool for artists. And I really got to know that production end of it very well because, like I said, a lot of the groups wanted me to be out there on press. Burton Cummings, Alice Cooper, a lot of these groups that we were doing stuff for, the Doors, Jefferson Airplane, wanted us to be there on press, which was great because Ivy Hill was the biggest printer. They were in Los Angeles, Terre Haute, and Long Island. And so they could pretty much control all the printing and the board printing, which was the industry was going toward. And so the fact that they had helped us, because we had talked about this before too, they weren't really in love with Craig Braun either. They had a relationship that was it was like a bad marriage. They both hated each other, but they stayed together in spite. Just to be spiteful to the other one. And so when Tony and I left Craig Braun, I mean, they were right there. We ended up having a luncheon with Lou Garlick and Murray Gordon, the guys that owned Ivy Hill, at the at the Beverly Hills Hotel. They had a cabana there, and it was really strange because Tony, my partner, had really had the relationship with them. I was kind of like a terror guy because I was a guy that was out on press and causing, delays because I just wouldn't let things run, and I'd make them change plates and reburn plates and etch stuff, and they hated me. But, they loved the fact that we were leaving Craig and they could help us do that. And so it was a very attractive situation for them and for us because in the beginning, when you're starting, when you start a company, we each put in $2,500. That's how we started. There were three partners. After the third month, there were only two partners because the third partner just couldn't make that transition between owner and employee. And you need to do that. You need to really make that transformation in mentally and physically, and he just couldn't do it. Love the guy, greatest guy in the world to party with, a guy named Lou Morris, and he was the production buyer for Craig Braun. So when I left Craig Braun, I took his vice president and his president of production. So again, that's why I never received a Christmas card, even to this day, from Craig. Even though I give him credit, he gives me no credit. I give him credit for stuff that he had suggested, that he had, wanted to me to do, and a lot of it worked out really good. It was just the attitude and the feeling of being abused and taken advantage of that just really didn't work.
Well, you know
So
what? You care about the artist. You had mentioned that. You said when you get a project, you really want to see it through. And
yeah,
especially when it comes to the printer. What was Peter's reaction to that situation with the printer with the Carnegie
well,
Hall?
I mean, he was kind of like, I mean, at this point, it was just an album that they needed to put out.
Hmm.
And so again, there wasn't a lot to work with. I had one shot of Melanie you see here on the back cover, and I had this inside shot, which is really kind of I mean, it's her. It's the candles, it's the wine, it's the rose, it's all these things that go with her music.
Yes.
And so, but you see, there's no type in there. This really could have been, well, it really couldn't have been a front and back because it was a double record set. So it needed to have a gatefold, but they didn't give me a lot to work with, and that's really no excuse to how Peter felt about it. Peter felt like he wasn't as happy with it being printed as when they saw the artwork. When
Hmm.
they saw the artwork, I mean, when you see that lettering, that front cover lettering, and this back element there in the tortoiseshell, it was just beautiful. And the yellow was more buttercup yellow, not so bright. There was lace that went all the way around the edges. It was really a beautiful cover. And that rose, Carl Ramsey did a beautiful illustration of that rose, and it just really it fell short. I think part of it was because they printed it on paper, and when you print things on paper you're printing on a pretty much a flat surface. That was their choice to do a matte finish rather than a glossy finish. And that really the ink up just sucks into the pores of the paper and it tends to go even flatter. So I think that was, part of it. And then there was just nobody out on press. They ran it and, it's done. And you see it after the fact and it's kind of a bummer, but we've had that happen to us many times. And we actually talked about Good Thunder. Same kind of thing happened there when Jack called the art director in and creative director wanted to know why no credit was given to Pacific Pioneer. We weren't there. I never got a Christmas card from him either. Kind of depressing, but that's okay. I get one from you, Joyce.
You always have my admiration, Ernie. And you know what I did, when I heard about Melanie's passing, the music is always a comfort. I, and it's even more of a comfort because I know that you had something to do with Madrugada, that beautiful design. Guess what I did yesterday? I listened to the entire album.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
thought about the design. I was actually looking at the design of the pictures that you sent. And, Melanie shared that when she was at Woodstock, it was really an out of body experience.
Yeah.
She
Yeah.
was so young, when she performed that and to be in front of all of those wonderful people. And
Yeah.
she said she actually had an out of body experience. So that kind of came through in the design with Madrugada.
Yeah, she had talked about that when we were working on the Gather Me album. She had mentioned, how that experience, and she caught, and I think that was one of the things, and she kind of said it here and there. that was one of the experiences that kept her wanting to do live performances
Yes.
instead of just studio albums, you know. And she did, like you said, she did a lot of personal, small, even smaller places, venues that were really, um, it was satisfying for her. It was like what really made it all worthwhile. And again, you know, her and Peter, they were like peas and carrots. Those two were just really so fun to work with and just so honest. Peter was probably one of him and Shep Gordon. Those two guys were probably and what's his name? No, Schiffer, nor Burton's ex-manager,
Lauren.
Lauren Schiffer, right? And you know, he was like that too. You know, there are a few. You know, you always hear these horror stories about how managers, if the record companies don't get to them, the managers get to them, and they think they have money and they don't because you know, I guess Butch Stone turned out to be that way as well with Black Oak. But you know, artists, all they want to do is create. Melanie was
Yes.
like that. All she wanted to do was perform. She loved performing. It was her drug. And um, she's going to be greatly missed. I mean, when I heard of it, um, I couldn't believe it. I mean, I was waiting for them to reach back out to me to do this documentary and take the pieces because we got that far. And then the pandemic hit, and I didn't hear anything more. I think I even sent along an email at one point to her assistant who said that they're putting it on a back burner for the moment. And then, you know, time goes by. And it's like people that go in and out of your life. We had a very good experience just the other day with a kid named Rick Lynch, who worked with me at Pacific Eye and Ear and went on to have the number one movie poster company, design company in the industry. It's called BLT. And he and two other people that worked at Dazoo, where Rick helped me get a job there after I left my second company. I thought, well, getting into movie posters, that's going to be great. It's like album covers. You see, but it was a nightmare. It was a nightmare. But Rick loved it and went on to create. I had two or 300 people about 300 people working for him before the pandemic hit. Now there's about half that many afterwards, but they did 80% of the movie posters that you saw out
Wow.
there. And from Drew Struzan, Bill Garland, you know, three or four of these people that worked at Pacific Pioneer went on to work with him in that. But Rick just came by a couple days ago, and it was just great reminiscing with him. And just we both got mohawks on the same that we had gotten Panavision as an account, and we shaved our heads into mohawks.
And
And we
that's when Jack Holzman
yeah,
was
yeah,
there.
and yeah, and it's so funny. Yeah, you remember that. Well, we started drinking vodka at like 6:30 in the morning, and then by 10 o'clock we were out of it. And Bonnie's hairstylist came over and gave us both mohawks, and then about 2 hours later we went to the Panavision party at Andy Romanoff's house where Jack and all these
Captain Gas, Captain
yeah,
Gas.
yeah, and here we come, you know, Chinook and Hawkeye. You know, I mean, it was crazy, but we had great relationship with Panavision. They were our client for almost 9 years. We did some great stuff with Jack, and then it was sold, and then sold again. We lasted through three regimes, which is really kind of a record for companies like Pacific Eye and Ear in the corporate world. You know, I was also with Nestle for 30 years, which was an even bigger thing, and Coca-Cola for a few years. I mean, it's kind of the corporate world is very rewarding monetarily, but creatively, unless you're next to the power, you know, it's awful because you have, you know, when we were working with the groups loved it. The crazier we got, the better they loved it. The more creative we got, the more they loved it. But in the corporate world, it's a whole different group of people that are looking at it. And when I say groups, there's marketing people, there's PR people, there's the business people. There's a half a dozen different groups of people that are looking at what you do so that at one point when it's done, you look at it and you can recognize two or three things that were pieces of what you originally had done. So, but it's rewarding, you know, monetarily, which is something that when the music business sort of dried up for Pacific Eye and Ear, and by 1984, we were doing very little album cover stuff, but mainly corporate work. Our the whole emphasis shifted. We had talked about that before as well, about how I didn't need all the illustrators that I had in the record business because we're now in the corporate world, and corporate people want to see pictures of their products, especially food products. So I just, it's so funny, Joyce, the way life works
Yeah, you're
and
so
how you,
right.
well, how you sit and realize, that all the time you wasted worrying about stuff and trying to make stuff happen, and it's just going to happen. It's hard to come to that realization, but it's just going to happen. And it seems like there's always an opportunity that comes out of so many that come out of left field. I'm going to be posting some images that we just did a couple of months ago, packaging for a Canadian company called Plastic Free that has a great plastic bag that's biodegradable. And we did three box packaging and promotion and stuff. And I've been waiting for them to be out there in the stores before I start posting it. But we've been doing a lot of stuff like that, and I'm this year there's going to be very exciting because we're going to be doing something that nobody in the world has ever done. And it's going to be talked about first here on Ernie's Corner and
Oh,
the
wow.
Party. I mean, this is going to be something that in the whole wide world, there has never been anything like what we're going to be doing. And I partnered up with a couple of people that are totally on board with what I was on board with, and it's just great. Life is wonderful. I miss Melanie, but I'm happy that her and Peter are back together.
Me too, Ernie. Well, let's do another Mind Meld. Yeah, I really sat and listened to that Madrigada album and
Yeah,
and
well, why don't
just let
you
it
pick it this
sink
time?
in. Well, you know
You,
which one I love, and it was the one she actually didn't write. It was Jim Croce who wrote it, "Lover's Cross."
yes, yes.
Melanie was a lot like Richie Havens because even if they sang another writer or singer song, they made it their
Their
own.
own. Yes, yes, absolutely. And I agree. That's a great pick. It's a great pick. And I that Madrigada album, yeah, I mean, the Gather Me was okay because it had the brand new key on it. But this one, Madrigada was the one again. Live at Carnegie Hall was kind of like a gathering of other stuff too. And Madrigada was something totally, completely different than anything that she had in either one of these other albums. And I think it's great. And I
She had
think that,
very good reviews on it. I was really
yeah,
surprised. Another one, I Am Being Guided. When she sings a song, when she really gets into that inner core,
it moves you.
it moves you, but you become the song and the
Yes.
lyrics, I
She
am
had
not
that
the
magic.
driver.
She had that magic. And Richie Havens had it too. And a lot of these other artists. I mean, it's a shame that it seems like that whole concept of that in music has moved away. And it's now a lot of yelling and screaming and rapping and death rock and all the rest of it. It's just kind of crazy. And yeah, Melanie had that way of reaching and in person too, very, and it wasn't always about business. We would get together and just socialize and stuff. I mean, not a lot, but when there was an opportunity there, we did. And it was like you felt very comfortable. And Peter was that kind of guy. If I had to say, put Peter and her in one word, comfortable. They were very comfortable, and I love and miss them both.
He cared so much about her because when
Yeah.
I saw her, Ernie, at a record store in New Jersey that brought in a lot of great acts like Melanie, and you felt like you knew her. And Peter was like when we were standing in line in the meet and greet line, Peter was talking to people in the line. And when he approached me, I was telling him about my radio show. He gave me her card, this beautiful little card. I still have it to this day. And
Wow.
very sadly, Peter left us about 5 days later after that appearance. But you could tell he really cared about her.
Oh yeah.
He really, he watched over her a lot. And they used to like tease each other. I
Yeah.
can remember at that concert. She was asking the audience, what would you like to hear? And then Peter said, "Well, why don't you play this? You, I'm asking them." And he
Yeah.
starts laughing.
Yeah.
Everybody just broke out laughing.
Yeah. He had a great smile too, and he was very,
Yes.
very smart. He didn't make a lot of snap judgments, and he thought about things, and that was really important. Shep Gordon's very much like that. You can talk to him about stuff, and you don't really know how he's going to react one way or the other, and he'll think about it before he puts his mind in gear before his mouth goes in gear, which is I'm exactly the opposite. So I tend to, put my mouth in gear and the brain's not working. But having that moment that I had with them is really a special place in my heart. And 250 albums, these really stand out, and she really stands out as. And again, I was a big fan of hers before I even met her. I mean, I really like Melanie. I mean, it was all part of the other. It wasn't the Country Joe McDonald and Fish, or any of these bands that were coming out of San Francisco that were rock and roll. She was more like a Joan Baez or Judy Collins, or people like that. And I really tend to lean toward that music a lot, as well as heavy metal and rock. I mean, but this kind of music holds a special place in my heart.
Me too. And she had this way of laughing at herself and about life. It wasn't always, yeah, she would get very deep into like, the social consciousness of the time. But then she also like animal crackers. And
Yeah.
I love beautiful people. She sang it when I saw her in concert. And I think that is, I mean, some people say, it's a silly song. I'm thinking no, because it was the simplicity of peace and love.
Yeah,
It's
and
not,
it
it's
was
a
her.
simple thing. It was a simple
Yeah.
thing, and she
It's
captured it.
it's a simple concept, and you could get very complicated, and did get very
Amen.
complicated a lot of things, but she kept it simple, kept it clean, kept it pure. A lot of love and emotion went into her singing, and it came across to the audiences. It certainly touched me.